Here's something that probably never crossed your mind while pouring milk into your morning coffee. That milk almost certainly came from a cow. Maybe you've tried goat milk in your latte, or sipped something made from sheep milk on a trip abroad. Humans have even figured out how to milk camels, yaks, water buffalo, and reindeer. An entire menu of species, all lined up on your grocery shelf in one form or another. But there's one animal missing from that list, and it's not some rare, hard-to-find creature. It's one of the most common animals on the planet, and one of the earliest that humans ever brought into their lives: the pig. Pigs are mammals. Every mammal produces milk, and pigs are no exception. Their milk is packed with fat, protein, and sugar. Everything you'd expect from a healthy, nutritious mammalian milk. So here's the real puzzle. Why did your ancestors look at a cow and decide, this is worth milking every single day, then look at a pig, standing right next to it, and never even attempt the same thing? The answer has almost nothing to do with whether pig milk is safe to drink. It has everything to do with the pig itself, its body, its behavior, and a hidden economic decision your ancestors made thousands of years ago without ever writing it down. To understand why, you have to stop thinking about the milk and start looking at the animal producing it. Because a mother pig, called a sow, can actually produce a surprising amount of milk. That's not the problem. The real problem is something far more physical, far more practical, and honestly, far stranger than you'd expect. Before we get into it, if you find these hidden pieces of human history fascinating, hit subscribe. This channel digs into the strange, overlooked decisions your ancestors made, decisions that are still shaping your life today, right down to what's sitting in your fridge. Let's get the obvious wrong idea out of the way first. Pig milk isn't toxic. It isn't unsafe. It isn't missing some nutrient that makes it unfit for anything to drink. In terms of pure composition, fat, protein, sugar. It looks like ordinary mammalian milk. So if edibility isn't the issue, the real answer has to be somewhere else entirely. And it is. It's in the body of the pig itself. Start with the udder. A cow's udder is one large, exposed gland, sitting low and open, practically designed for something else to grab onto it. A pig's body works nothing like that. Instead of one big reservoir, a sow has a long row of small, separate mammary glands running down her belly, each one connected to its own tiny duct. There's no single place to squeeze. There's no convenient handle, just a line of small taps, each producing a small amount on its own. But the bigger issue isn't the shape, it's the timing. Milk release in mammals isn't constant. It's triggered by a hormonal reflex called letdown, where a burst of oxytocin causes milk to flow in short, tightly timed windows, not as a steady stream. In cows, that window is long enough, and the udder large enough, that a human can step in and take advantage of it. In pigs, that window is almost violently short, sometimes lasting only around 10 to 20 seconds. And it happens only when enough piglets are nursing at once, stimulating multiple glands simultaneously. That's the part that breaks everything. A cow can be milked because her biology tolerates a stand-in. A human hand can mimic the calf. A pig's system doesn't work that way. It's built for a synchronized litter, not a solitary human trying to coax one gland into action. Miss that short window, and there's nothing to collect until the next cycle begins. This isn't a flaw in the pig. It's evolution doing exactly what it's supposed to do, optimizing milk delivery for a litter of 10 or more piglets nursing together, not for an animal standing outside the pen with a bucket. So before we even get to the economics of dairy farming, the pig has already disqualified itself on physical terms alone. The question now isn't why humans didn't bother, it's whether they ever really had a workable option to begin with. So let's say, for a moment, that someone actually managed to catch that short window. They synchronized with the sow. They got their hands on the right gland at the right second. There's still a second problem waiting. And this one has nothing to do with anatomy. It's simple math. A single litter of piglets is rarely small. Sows commonly give birth to 10, 12, sometimes more piglets at once. Every one of those piglets needs to nurse, and needs to nurse often, because piglets grow at an extraordinary rate. All of that milk the sow produces isn't sitting there waiting for a surplus. It's already spoken for, distributed across a dozen hungry mouths that need it just to survive the first few weeks of life. There's no leftover, no extra, no margin a human could quietly step in and take. Now compare that to a cow. A calf, on its own, needs only a fraction of what a modern dairy cow actually produces. That gap between what a calf requires and what the cow's body generates didn't happen by accident. Over thousands of years, humans selectively bred cattle, generation after generation, favoring cows that produced more milk than their calves could physically drink. It's a slow, deliberate rewriting of the animal's own biology, driven entirely by human preference. The result is a built-in surplus. Milk the calf will never touch, sitting there, ready for someone else to collect. That's the entire foundation dairy farming was built on. Not that cows are naturally generous with their milk, but that generations of humans engineered them to overproduce it, Pigs never went through that process, and honestly, they were never good candidates for it in the first place. Even if you tried to replicate the same selective breeding with pigs, you're still fighting the biology from part 1, the scattered glands, the short letdown window, the need for multiple piglets nursing at once just to trigger milk release at all. You'd be trying to force an animal's entire reproductive system to work backward, against millions of years of evolutionary design. So now put the two animals side by side, not just on milk, but on everything that matters for turning an animal into a dairy source. Cows are large. That size alone matters more than people realize, because a bigger body means more physical capacity for milk production per animal, more return for the same amount of daily effort. Cows are also, by temperament, relatively calm and predictable. They don't panic easily. They tolerate repeated handling, and critically, they can be approached and milked over and over across months without the process harming them at all. A cow you milk today can be milked again tomorrow, and the day after that, the animal stays alive, healthy, and productive for years. Pigs are a different story, behaviorally as much as biologically. They're highly intelligent, fast-moving, and famously difficult to physically restrain when they don't want to cooperate. A sow protecting piglets can turn aggressive almost instantly, which makes the idea of a human repeatedly approaching her, day after day, to attempt milking, a genuinely risky proposition. And even if you succeeded, and got past the anatomy, and got past the danger, you'd still be collecting a small, inconsistent amount for all that effort and risk. This is where the comparison stops being close. It's not that pigs are slightly worse at producing milk for humans, it's that cows check almost every box required for sustainable dairy farming: size, temperament, repeatability, and a genetically engineered surplus, while pigs fail nearly all of them at once. Not because pigs are somehow inferior animals, because their entire biology and behavior evolved to serve a completely different purpose. And once you see it laid out this way, the outcome starts to feel less like a mystery and more like the only realistic answer that was ever on the table. It wasn't a coin flip between two similar options. It was cows checking every requirement, and pigs missing nearly all of them. If you've made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel was built for. Subscribe, because next we're going deeper into which other animals humans actually attempted to milk, and which ones failed for reasons even stranger than this one. Speaking of failed attempts, do you know of any other animal humans tried to milk that just didn't work out? Drop it in the comments. I'm curious how many of you already know one. There's one more piece to this puzzle, and it has nothing to do with udders or timing. It's about what these animals eat, and what that costs. Cows, goats, and sheep are grazers. Their entire digestive system is built around grass, something humans can't eat and don't want. A cow standing in a field isn't competing with you for food. It's converting a resource that's essentially worthless to humans into something extremely valuable: milk, meat, and eventually more cows. That's about as close to a free lunch as early farming ever got. Pigs don't work that way. Pigs are omnivores, closer to humans in what they'll eat than any grazing animal ever will be. Grains, roots, scraps, the same kinds of food a human household would want for itself. Every mouthful a pig eats is, at least partially, a mouthful in competition with the people raising it. That doesn't make pigs a bad animal to keep. They're incredibly efficient at converting food into meat, which is exactly why pig farming thrived for that purpose. But for dairy specifically, where the entire business model depends on a cheap, abundant food source producing a surplus product, a pig quietly breaks the equation. You're feeding it food you could eat yourself, for a milk supply that, as we already covered, barely exists to begin with. So biology says no, behavior says no, and now economics says no as well. At some point, that's not a string of bad luck. That's a pattern. Now zoom out even further, because there's a second layer to this that isn't about biology at all. It's about time and momentum. Humans didn't stumble onto cow milk yesterday. Cattle domestication stretches back thousands of years, and across that span, dairy farming didn't stay static. It compounded. Selective breeding kept increasing milk surplus, generation after generation. Communities built entire food systems around that surplus. Cheese, butter, yogurt, fermented dairy products that could be stored, traded, and preserved long before refrigeration existed. Each of those innovations made cow milk more valuable, more embedded, more worth the effort of the next generation to keep investing in. That's the part easy to miss. We tend to imagine early humans running some kind of clean, rational experiment, testing every animal fairly and picking the biological winner. That's not what happened. What happened is closer to how habits work in your own life. Once a system starts working, even reasonably well, very few people stop to ask whether a completely different system might have worked better. You don't rebuild the whole thing from scratch. You keep refining what's already producing results. That's essentially what happened with dairy. Once cattle proved reliable, humans didn't pause to reconsider pigs with fresh eyes. Why would they? There was no incentive to gamble on an animal that was already failing on multiple fronts, when the one already in front of them kept getting better every generation. So the gap between cows and pigs, as dairy animals, didn't just start wide. It got wider, deliberately, on purpose, for thousands of years. While pigs were never given a second look, which means the milk in your fridge today isn't really the product of pigs being unsuitable in some abstract sense. It's the end result of a very long, very consistent chain of small human decisions, each one reinforcing the last, stretching back long before anyone alive today was born. You didn't choose cow milk. Your ancestors did, thousands of years ago, and every generation since simply inherited that choice without ever questioning it. Now, cows weren't the only animal that passed this test. Once you understand what actually made a species workable for dairy, biology that tolerates a stand-in, a manageable surplus, calm enough temperament, cheap food, a whole list of other animals suddenly makes sense. Goats and sheep followed a similar path to cattle, especially across the Mediterranean and the Middle East, where rocky, dry terrain wasn't always kind to large grazing cows. Goats and sheep are smaller, hardier, and able to survive on rougher vegetation, which made them the practical choice in regions where cattle struggled. Farther east and into arid stretches of Africa and Asia, camels took on that same role. Animals capable of surviving in climates that would kill most livestock, while still producing milk humans could rely on. In parts of Asia, water buffalo filled a similar niche, thriving in wet, marshy environments where cattle were less efficient. High in mountain regions, yaks took over, built for cold, thin air, and terrain that would exhaust almost any other dairy animal. And in the far north, some communities even domesticated reindeer, animals capable of surviving Arctic conditions no cow ever could. Look at that list side by side, and a pattern jumps out immediately. None of these animals were chosen because their milk tasted best, or because their bodies were the most impressive. They were chosen because they fit. They tolerated repeated handling. They reproduced predictably enough to keep a herd stable. They lived in groups, which made managing large numbers of them realistic instead of chaotic. And critically, they ate whatever was cheapest and most available in that specific environment. Grass, scrub, moss, whatever the local land provided for free, that's the real formula. Not the best possible animal in a vacuum, but the best available animal for a specific place, a specific climate, and a specific set of human needs. Different regions, working independently, kept arriving at the same underlying logic, even while choosing completely different species. And pigs never fit that formula. Anywhere. Not in Europe. Not in the Middle East, not in Asia. Every single dairy animal that succeeded shared a cluster of traits pigs simply don't have. It wasn't regional bad luck. It was the same biological and behavioral wall, showing up again and again, no matter where you looked on the map. So picture it directly. Imagine a farmer standing in a field, somewhere in the ancient world, thousands of years ago, looking at two animals tied up side by side. On one side, a cow, large, calm, chewing on grass it found for free, its udder practically presenting itself for milking. On the other side, a pig, smart, fast, unpredictable, its milk hidden behind a dozen scattered glands that only release for a few seconds at a time, and only when a litter of piglets is already nursing. There's no real decision to make here. This isn't a farmer weighing two solid options and picking the slightly better one. It's a farmer looking at one animal that solves the problem, and another animal that fights back against every part of the process. Choosing the cow isn't cleverness. It's the obvious answer. One that would have been obvious to nearly anyone standing in that field, in almost any culture, at almost any point in history. And that's really what domestication comes down to. Once you strip away the assumptions, it was never a search for the single best animal on Earth in some absolute sense. It was a search for the animal that fit the constraints already in front of people, the climate they lived in, the food available to them, the danger they were willing to tolerate, and the amount of daily effort they had to spare. Cows didn't win because they were superior in every possible way. They won because, when you added up biology, temperament, food cost, and consistency, nothing else came close to checking every box at once. That single insight ends up explaining a lot more than just milk. It explains why certain animals became permanent fixtures of human life while others, despite being just as intelligent, just as capable, just as biologically valid, were quietly set aside for an entirely different purpose. Which brings us back to that cup of coffee. Every time you pour milk into it, you're not just adding flavor. You're holding the end result of a decision made thousands of years ago, one nobody voted on, one nobody debated in a meeting. A quiet, practical choice, repeated by farmers across different continents who never met each other, who never compared notes, and who still arrived at the exact same answer. Cows fit. Pigs didn't, not because pig milk was ever unsafe, and not because pigs were somehow lesser animals. They were simply built for a different job entirely, one that had nothing to do with buckets, udders, or your morning routine. So the next time you see a pig, whether on a farm, in a documentary, or on a package in the grocery store, know this. That animal isn't missing out on anything. It's not sitting there wishing it had ended up like the cow in the next field. It was never in the running to begin with. Its body, its behavior, its entire evolutionary path pointed somewhere else, long before humans ever got involved. And that pig, it's not jealous of the cow standing next to it. It's too busy handling the job humans actually assigned it. One that's been keeping breakfast tables full in a completely different way for just as many thousands of years. That's the strange, quiet decision hiding behind something as ordinary as a splash of milk in your coffee. If you enjoyed pulling apart a mystery like this, one hiding in plain sight in your everyday life, subscribe now. This channel is built entirely around questions exactly like this one. The ordinary things around you that actually have a fascinating, ancient story behind them, waiting to be uncovered.